Japan has developed an immense amount of growth in the last 100 years due to the fighting and surrender in World War II. The following years after World War I, Japan had tension with the Soviet Union and the U.S.
In 1939, the Soviet Union and Japanese armies fought on the Manchurian-Mongolian frontier in an infamous conflict called the Soviet-Japanese War. The war was undeclared and started in May and ended September 1939. The Japanese were severely beaten.
However, Japan's conflict with the U.S. was different from the conflict with the Soviet Union. In the year 1940, the U.S. formalized aid to China as well as extended credits to the Chinese government for purchasing war supplies. Japan repealed the Treaty of Commerce with the United States, which caused tension between the two countries. In 1941, Japan signed a neutrality pact with the Soviet Union. This showed Japan's military would be going into Southeast Asia, where the United States had greater interests. This resulted with the United States halting negotiations with Japanese diplomats. United States enforced an embargo against Japan. Diplomats in Washington hardly came to agreements. Pro-Chinese sentiments in the United States made it difficult to reach any resolution. The embargo forced on Japan caused serious shortages and convinced Japan that the U.S. officials opposed further negotiations. Japan wanted to act quickly. The U.S. had not given up on negotiations and doubted that Japan had the military strength to attack the U.S. territory. However, on December 7, 1941, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor.
The attack yesterday on the Hawaiian Islands has caused severe damage to American naval and military forces. I regret to tell you that very many American lives have been lost. In addition, American ships have been reported torpedoed on the high seas between San Francisco and Honolulu.
The bombing was a large tragedy for America. However, Pearl Harbor united them and motivated them to join World War II and fight against Japan.
The Pearl Harbor attack gave Japan a huge morale boost. Japan was a militarized dictatorship which wanted more power. They had no fear when it came to fighting against the U.S.
Eventually, as America grew stronger and developed the atomic bombs, Japan realized the powerful country they were facing.
Japan was also nervous of the formidable Soviet Union invading their country.
As the conflict between America and Japan in World War II concluded, the pressure of America's military and the threat of the Soviet Union forced the countries to unfairly compromise and construct Japan to be a demilitarized country with a democratic constitution.
The atomic bombs that America's military dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki was a major reason why Japan surrendered. The two bombs that were dropped were incredibly powerful. The first bomb dropped was referred to as Little Boy. Little Boy was the first nuclear weapon used in the war. It was dropped in Hiroshima. Made of uranium-235, it had enough power to leave minor effects on Japan for the next 4 months. The atomic bomb killed a little under 100,000 people. The bigger bomb was called Fat Man. It was dropped in Nagasaki. It killed around 80,000 people and was stronger than Little Boy.
Dropped one bomb on Hiroshima and destroyed its usefulness to the enemy. That bomb has more power than 20,000 tons of TNT.
President Truman also expressed at the time
that he had ordered Japan's surrender to the Allies to prevent the ultimate collapse and obliteration of the Japanese nation. The emperor asked his people to refrain from emotional outbursts. He blamed the atomic bomb for Japan's defeat, as did Premier Kentaro Suzuki, in an address which followed that of the emperor.
Many lives and families were affected by the atomic bomb, which devastated Emperor Hirohito and helped Japan realize their country had to capitulate to America. The United States showed how committed they were by putting out their most powerful bomb, which they had never used before. America's military persistence was a crucial reason why Japan surrendered.
America's military persistence was not the only thing that affected them. Japan's fear of the Soviet Union invading them was a key reason why they surrendered. Years before the war, Japan and the Soviet Union both were rising powers, and both wanted to extend their territories.
Their country's rivalry was continued through the war, so Japan knew its adversary. In 1940, Nazi Germany attacked the Soviet Union, so the Soviet Union resented the Axis powers throughout the rest of the war. During World War II, Japan, Germany, and later Italy formed together to become allies and created the Axis powers. The Soviet Union leader Stalin stated,
Наша армия будет Россия. Наша страна будет поставлена на колени. Но враг здесь только просчитался. Несмотря на временный неуспех, наша армия и наш флот героически отбивают атаки врага на протяжении всего фронта, на севере огромный урон. А наша страна, вся наша страна, организовалась в единый боевой лагерь, чтобы вместе с нашей армией.
The Soviet Union had a strong military, and it was very aggressive fighting against Axis countries. The Soviet Union focused mainly in Europe, but on August 8, 1945, after pressure from the US, the USSR turned attention to Japan. 9 minutes after Moscow declared war with Japan, the Soviet Union was already bombing Japan. Russia was very motivated to invade quickly.
The Soviets realized their chance to attack would be at Japan's weakest moment. The country decided to invade when Japan was already too fatigued and busy fighting off America.
Roughly 1 month after Russia became involved, Japan surrendered. It is argued that the fear of Soviet invasion persuaded the Japanese to opt for surrender to the Americans, who they believed would treat them more generously than the Soviets. America's military persistence was a crucial reason why Japan surrendered.
Emperor Hirohito stated, "But now the war has lasted for nearly 4 years. The gallant fighting of our military and naval forces, the diligence and assiduity of our servants of the state, and the devoted service of our 100,000 people, the war situation has developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage, while the general trends of the world have all turned against her interest. How are we to save the millions of our subjects, nor to atone ourselves before the hallowed spirits of our imperial ancestors? This is the reason why we have ordered the acceptance of the provisions of the Joint Declaration of Power."
Once Japan surrendered, General MacArthur stated,
"To the Pacific Basin has come the vista of a new emancipated world. Today freedom is on the offensive, democracy is on the march." When America forced Japan to sign the Constitution, it was no easy task. America had to heartily pressure Japan by persistently convincing them to sign the document that went against most of their beliefs, which foreshadowed what Japan is today. Japan's former constitution, the Meiji Constitution, was changed so that the Japanese people could rule for themselves and so that the emperor could no longer have complete power. Only 6% of Japan agreed with the change in government, but it was not their decision. After the country was made democratic, the next step was to demilitarize it. In 1954, the Treaty of Mutual Defense was signed, which forced Japan to replace Japanese military forces with American military forces, while Japan's were no longer allowed to be used. When the surrender was announced to America, the people merrily rejoiced on a day they called Victory over Japan Day, also referred to as VJ Day. Recently, North Korea and Japan have been in conflict, and if North Korea attacks Japan, the US will have to defend Japan.
North Korea has an atomic bomb just like the United States. This atomic bomb would affect Japan just like the United States did. However, Japan has come very far the last few years due to
this policy, that America has to defend a democratic, demilitarized Japan, shows the direct impact of the compromise in World War II that resulted from the conflict of the Axis and Allied powers.